That's all it took to unleash humanity's first thinking weapon. December 16, 1944, 0630 hours, Germany. Wehrmacht officer Klaus Riedel's pencil scratched frantically across frost-covered paper as he recorded what would become one of the most terrifying entries in German combat logs. The Americans possess a new weapon that defies all tactical doctrine. Our men are being slaughtered in their foxholes by artillery that explodes in the air above them. There is no defense, no cover. Death comes from the sky itself. Through morning mist, Riedel had just witnessed the annihilation of an entire battalion. 702 German soldiers dead in 3 minutes, not by direct hits, not by conventional shells, but by something impossible, shells that somehow knew exactly when to explode. But here's what's absolutely mind-blowing. Those pencil scratches described America's most closely guarded secret weapon, a device so revolutionary it would increase artillery effectiveness by 1,000% and save hundreds of thousands of Allied lives. The proximity fuse, a miniature radar system crammed into an artillery shell, representing the world's first smart weapon, a thinking munition that would prove more decisive than any other secret technology, except the atomic bomb itself. The impossible mathematics. The numbers seemed like science fiction. Conventional shells required 500 rounds to destroy one enemy aircraft. Proximity fuse shells needed only 155 rounds. Traditional artillery killed soldiers in trenches 5% of the time. Proximity fuses achieved 70% casualty rates. London's survival against V-1 flying bombs went from impossible to inevitable. But the story began not in American laboratories, but in Britain's darkest hour. The Desperate Gamble, October 30th, 1939, England. Young scientist William Butement submitted a proposal that seemed like pure fantasy, an artillery shell that could think. Working with colleagues Edward Shire and Amherst Thompson, Butement had conceived radio waves that would detect approaching aircraft and detonate shells automatically at optimal distance. The brutal mathematics were clear. During World War I, anti-aircraft gunners fired 8,500 shells for each enemy aircraft destroyed. By 1939, with planes flying faster and higher, the ratio had worsened. Britain's survival depended on dramatically improving these odds. But Butement faced an insurmountable problem. His radio fuse would need to survive being fired at forces exceeding 20,000 times normal gravity, spin at 30,000 revolutions per minute, and still detect aircraft 70 feet away. British scientists proved the concept viable by June 1940, but revealed the crushing technological challenge. No existing electronics could survive being shot from a gun. But here's where this story gets absolutely insane. The Tizard mission, September 6, 1940, Halifax, Nova Scotia. The liner Duchess of Richmond arrived carrying cargo more valuable than gold, Sir Henry Tizard, and a black metal deed box containing every major British military secret. Britain, fighting for survival, was sharing its most closely guarded technologies with America, a country not yet at war. September 19th, Washington. In a conference room overlooking Connecticut Avenue, British physicist John Cockcroft presented the proximity fuse concept to American physicist Merle Tuve. Tuve, raised in rural South Dakota, had spent his childhood tinkering with radios. Just weeks earlier, listening to London Blitz reports with his wife, he had turned to her with tears in his eyes. "We have to find a way to stop those bombers. Technology has to provide the answer." Cockcroft was handing him exactly that opportunity. The impossible challenge. December 1940. A Washington mansion became the nerve center of America's most secret weapons program. Tuve assembled a team that would reshape warfare. Richard Roberts, nuclear physicist who worked with Niels Bohr, James Van Allen, future discoverer of Earth's radiation belts Lloyd Berkner, pioneer in ionospheric research. The challenge defied every assumption about electronics. The proximity fuse needed to be a complete radar system, compressed into a space smaller than a coffee can, surviving forces that destroyed any conventional device. Van Allen tackled the fundamental problem, creating vacuum tubes that could survive being shot from a gun. Traditional tubes shattered at just 100 times gravity. The fuse needed to survive forces 200 times greater. The breakthrough, January 1942. Van Allen's mousetrap spring innovation protected tube filaments during massive firing acceleration, then released them for normal operation during flight. The single patent, classified until 1947, represented one of the war's most important electronic innovations. By March 1942, the project had outgrown Carnegie's facilities. Johns Hopkins University established the Applied Physics Laboratory in an abandoned Chevrolet dealership that still smelled of motor oil when scientists arrived. Signs appeared on every wall. "I don't want any damn fool in this laboratory to save money. I only want him to save time." But here's what truly broke enemy minds. First blood, January 5, 1943. Southwest Pacific near Guadalcanal. USS Helena's radar detected 4 Japanese dive bombers approaching at 12,000 feet. Lieutenant Russell Cochran commanded the aft 5-inch battery, loaded with shells marked with special green bands. The first salvo missed, still too distant. The second salvo followed 15 seconds later. At 5,000 yards, one shell passed approximately 60 feet from the lead bomber. The explosion looked different from anything Cochran had seen. Instead of continuing past or exploding on impact, it detonated in midair, sending a perfect sphere of fragments outward. The Japanese bomber's wing sheared off instantly. The engine, peppered with hundreds of steel fragments, burst into flames. The aircraft simply ceased flying. "We couldn't believe it," recalled gunner's mate Anthony Pooley. "For months, we'd fired thousands of rounds, maybe hitting one plane if we were lucky. Now we were knocking them down with just a few shots. It was like God himself was guiding our shells." The transformation. By spring 1943, proximity fuses were flowing to the Pacific Fleet. The statistics revealed complete transformation. Proximity fuses comprised only 25% of ammunition fired. They accounted for 51% of all Japanese aircraft destroyed. Rounds per kill dropped from 580 to 155. Gunner's mate Robert Chen documented the change. March 1943, fired 300 rounds at attacking aircraft, no hits. September 1943, new ammunition with green bands arrived. Fired 80 rounds, destroyed 3 aircraft. The guys think we've gotten better at shooting. They don't know it's the shells doing the thinking now. The Great Marianas Turkey Shoot, June 19, 1944. The Philippine Sea. Japan committed its reconstituted carrier force, 9 carriers, 450 aircraft, their best remaining pilots. Lieutenant James Van Allen stood on USS Washington's bridge, watching his invention's ultimate test. The same Van Allen who developed shock-proof vacuum tubes now witnessed 423 Japanese aircraft approaching American Task Force 58. As Hellcat fighters tore into Japanese formations, those breaking through faced a wall of proximity-fused fire unlike anything in naval history. The sky filled with black puffs, each representing a thinking shell making its own decision to kill. "It was systematic slaughter," Van Allen later wrote. "The proximity fuses turned our ships into fortresses." Japanese pilots were brave, but courage couldn't overcome technology. By day's end, Japanese losses, 315 carrier aircraft plus 50 land-based. American losses, 29 aircraft, mostly operational accidents. The one-sided battle effectively ended Japanese carrier aviation forever. But here's what sealed Germany's fate. London's Shield, June 13, 1944. The first V-1 flying bomb's distinctive pulse jet engine echoed across London. Hitler's revenge weapon had arrived, but unlike the 1940-41 Blitz, London possessed a defense that seemed miraculous. Winston Churchill authorized proximity fuses for London's defense despite security risks. General Frederick Pyle deployed 500 heavy guns in a defensive belt south of London. The first week was terrifying. Conventional shells achieved only 24% success rates. Then proximity fuses arrived, flown directly from American production lines. The transformation was immediate. Second week, 46% of V-1s destroyed. Third week, 67%. Fourth week, 79%. Squadron leader Prudence Hill tracked the change. The first week, most V-1s got through. Then something changed. Suddenly the guns started destroying everything. V-1 after V-1 disappeared 10 miles from London. On August 28, 1944, the system achieved ultimate success. 104 V-1s launched at London, 96 destroyed by proximity-fused guns. Only 4 reached the city. The Ground War Revolution, December 16, 1944. The Battle of the Bulge marked proximity fuses' ground combat debut. Colonel Oscar Axelson faced a terrible decision. Use proximity fuses despite strict orders forbidding ground combat employment, or watch American cavalry squadrons be overrun. At 0600, Axelson gave the order that revolutionized ground warfare. Load proximity fuses, set for airburst. The effect was apocalyptic. Instead of exploding on impact, shells detonated at optimal height above ground. Fragments rained downward in lethal cones, reaching into foxholes behind walls under vehicles. Forward observer Lieutenant Richard Roston reported, "First salvo air burst over German infantry company in open. Estimate 80% casualties. Survivors running to woodline." German veteran Otto Hartmann, captured 2 days later, testified, "The artillery was unlike anything we experienced in Russia or Normandy. We dove into foxholes, but shells exploded above us. The industrial miracle." Behind every proximity fuse lay one of history's greatest production achievements. By late 1942, each fuse required 130 precision components never mass-produced before. The mobilization was staggering. 87 companies involved, 110 factories operating 24/7, 80,000 workers at peak production. Cost reduced from $730 per unit to $18 at Crossley. Corporation in Cincinnati converted from radios to proximity fuses. Betty Morrison, assembly worker, recalled, "We didn't know what we were making. Security was unbelievable. We sat 8 hours daily, soldering tiny components. Only after the war did we learn we'd built the fuses that saved so many boys." By spring 1944, American factories produced 70,000 proximity fuses daily, more than Germany's entire monthly conventional fuse production. But here's the most devastating truth: the enemy's blindness. Germany and Japan pursued proximity fuse development throughout the war but never achieved deployment. The Germans actually captured 20,000 proximity fuses during the Battle of the Bulge. Incredibly, German engineers examined them and concluded they were impossible. Dr. Hans Geertsen, leading German fuse expert, testified post-war. "We concluded they could not function as claimed. No vacuum tube could survive the forces. The Americans were attempting to deceive us. Germany had proximity fuses in their hands and didn't believe they could work." Japan's response was equally futile. Lieutenant Commander Yuzuru Fukao testified, "We knew American anti-aircraft fire had become impossibly accurate. We suspected proximity fuses but couldn't imagine how they functioned. We lacked industrial capacity for production." The Japanese response wasn't technological but tactical. Kamikaze attacks that accepted destruction as the price of reaching targets. It was an admission of complete technological defeat. The hidden cost while saving Allied lives. Proximity fuse production carried hidden costs emerging decades later. Workers used beryllium for soldering, unaware of its deadly nature. Pat Vlahos, whose mother worked at Sylvania, she developed mesothelioma in 1983. The beryllium she handled daily for 3 years killed her 40 years later. She was a casualty of war, just delayed by decades. The final accounting. The proximity fuse's impact defied comprehension. 22,734,481 proximity fuses manufactured. Estimated 25,000 enemy aircraft destroyed or damaged. Over 5,000 V-1 flying bombs destroyed. Tens of thousands of enemy soldiers killed, hundreds of thousands of Allied lives saved. Naval warfare statistics tell the clearest story. Pre-proximity fuse, 500, 2,000 rounds per aircraft destroyed. With proximity fuses, 155 rounds per aircraft destroyed. Improvement factor, 600, 200%. The judgment of history. Vannevar Bush provided the most comprehensive assessment. The proximity fuse created a 7-fold increase in anti-aircraft effectiveness, neutralized German V-1 attacks on London, and fundamentally changed land warfare tactics. No other development save radar and the atomic bomb had comparable impact. General Eisenhower declared,